Now, one of the most challenging situations I ever faced working with clients as a financial advisor was working with somebody that had a good income but hadn't even started the basic processes of saving and investing. It's shocking how many people, even highly paid professionals with good jobs, who live paycheck to paycheck simply because they have never learned the basics of financial planning, budgeting, saving, and then investing. Even opening this discussion, I found to be very challenging. Sometimes you're working with a person, they might be a doctor or an engineer or a web designer or some very accomplished professional, and they make a really good living, but they don't have significant savings, or even worse, they're in debt. Hello and welcome to Valuability, a video and audio podcast for financial professionals, business owners, and anyone interested in financial planning, business, leadership, and personal development. In this episode, we're going to talk about one of the basics of financial planning, and that is budgeting and paying yourself first. Now, you can find all of our episodes, both video and audio, on the web at value-ability.com. And of course, if you're watching us on YouTube, you can subscribe to our channel and click the bell to be notified of new episodes. We would love to hear from you if you have questions or topics that you'd like us to discuss, either by commenting on our YouTube video, or you can find us on Twitter and Instagram at value_ability. I'm joined today, as always, with my co-host, Philip Simensen. My name, I forgot to mention, is Danforth Fleak. And Philip, welcome.
Well, excellent, Dan, and look forward to this podcast with you. You know, Dan, you also reminded me, and I'll just interject, in my whole career, I was blessed by having many great mentors. And one, Harvey Golub. Harvey was managing director of McKinsey & Company. And he headed up the people development side of that. And then he found, he was tasked to find back in the early 80s, a Fuller Brush type of company that dealt with middle income America, because the Economic Recovery Tax Act was taking place and the IRAs and the time value money is going to end up being a lot of money. So Sandy Weil, head of American Express, said, Harvey, go find me a company. He did. He found him IDS. And then from IDS, Harvey ran that company very successfully. Sandy put him at the helm. Then he became president of American Express, and then he became chairman of American Express. The first time, though, he was president of American Express, the analysts asked him, Mr. Golub, who's your number one competitor? And without any hesitation, he responded and said, Disney World. Right? And they all said,
Right.
Well, Mr. Golub, we're more perplexed now that we've asked that question than before we asked that question. Do you mind explaining now to us why you said Disney World? He said, no. He looked at him deadpan, straight-faced. He said, see, the American populace will spend more time planning their 2-week holiday than they will their financial future.
Right.
So, it's a tough conversation. You're absolutely right, Dan. And look forward to this one.
Yeah. I always tried to use humor in opening this discussion, because you always ran the risk of, especially if you had somebody that was in that situation, somebody who was a professional, a high earner, or just somebody who's proud of the fact that they, have a decent, good, regular job, and you can, embarrass them or offend them if you approach this topic in the wrong way. So I always had a little bit of a trick. I always like to interject humor. My mentor, and for those of you who don't know, Philip was my mentor and still is.
Too kind.
Always taught me, always taught me humor is a great way to break down people's barriers. So and I think I actually just fell into this one day as I was working with someone, and I kind of noticed that I was saying some pretty basic things about, a budget and an emergency fund, and I could tell that just wasn't quite registering. So I actually switched gears a little bit, and I said, "Oh, so you remember that class we all had in elementary school? The one where they'd teach you about all this stuff, how to create a budget, how to save money and invest and all that sort of stuff." And, as I was saying that, I was nodding. And of course, the human typical human reaction is to mimic the person that you're talking to. And so the client started kind of nodding, but I could also tell that they had this kind of confused and hesitant look in their eyes, even though they were nodding and confirming. And at that point, I broke in with the joke, and I said, "No, you don't," because they never taught that class. How are you supposed to know how to do all these things if you've never been taught that? And at that point, the client laughed, and really you're going to go one of two ways with that, right? You're either going to end up offending them, which you probably were going to anyway, or you're going to make it into a moment of humor, a moment of levity, and it's going to break down that wall and allow you then to broach the topic of those basic skills: budgeting, saving, and paying yourself first.
Very good, Dan, and that's so true. Humor is always a good way to interact with your clients. But tell us, I'd like to hear a little bit more about this idea of paying yourself first. Why is it so important from your perspective? Because you've done very well over the years now.
I have. I had great leadership as a young man. I was also had just kind of a natural instinct towards budgeting. I was always very conscious of my expenditures when I got into the workforce. But the reality of it is that the tendency for humans is for your expenditures to expand to meet your income. So without a basic budget, the problem is that most people approach it backwards, right? And this is the core of what you taught me, that people approach it backwards. They say, when I get to this point, then I will start investing, or then I'll start saving. And of course, usually that it takes the shape in the form of when I get to the end of the month and I have $1,000 left in my checking account, or $500 left in my checking account. And we'll cover an article that talks about, what do you do once you've stopped bouncing checks in between your paychecks and have stopped living paycheck to paycheck. We'll cover that in a later episode, but people always approach it from that standpoint. And the reality is that never happens. If you don't come up with a plan, you are not ever going to reach that, because your expenses expand to meet your income.
Boy, so true. The more money you make, the bigger the checks you write. And unless you learn how to put yourself first in the payroll line, you're always going to be playing catch up. So, great point, Dan. So, how did you show your clients how to budget?
Well, first and foremost, you could use a budgeting worksheet, and I'll put a couple of examples, links to a couple examples in the description for the video, but it really doesn't even need to be that complicated. Honestly, you really just need to get out a pad and write down on one side your income, all your sources of income. You have a job, if you have any rental incomes, or if you have any side jobs, and then your monthly recurring expenses on the other side. Most people have never even done a basic budget like this, and they're generally shocked at the difference between their income and recurring expenses. The most common response is they look at the difference and they see that it's $700 a month or $800 a month, and their response is, where does it go? And until you know that, you're not gonna ever start the process of saving.
No, you won't be able to make those behavioral changes. So
Right.
It reminds me of the truth will set you free, but first it might make you miserable. But I'd rather know the
Right.
truth here.
Right. Yeah, so then next you just need to start a mechanism for essentially, the concept of paying yourself first. I always actually changed it a little bit when I would teach my clients about it. And I would say you need to treat your savings and your investments like a bill. It's not negotiable. It is a recurring expense. And so at the end of the recurring expenses lines, I would simply have them write in, okay, the difference was $700. Let's say you're going to save $250 a month. So you write in that and recalculate, okay, now your gap is $450. Okay, does that still feel comfortable to you for your, discretionary expenses, going out to dinner or going to a movie each month? Sure, that sounds good. Or maybe it's every 2 weeks, whatever. Yep, that sounds reasonable. Okay, well, let's see how it goes, and then we'll adjust from there. Now, the mechanism for that, you can do it a bunch of different ways. You could use a separate bank account with a monthly sweep into a savings account, or you could actually have it as a totally separate account at a different institution, and you could quote unquote pay that bill every month, write the check or do the bill pay to send that money to that account. Now, I prefer the automatic because it keeps you from any momentary feelings of I'd rather spend it on this or that, any momentary temptations, but it certainly can be done in just about any mechanism, as long as the mechanism is consistent and it's part of your natural processes of paying your bills each month.
Dan, great tip in setting up that separate account. One of the things I can just share too is Lisa and I, when we first were married, now that's 36 years ago, we'd set up a budget, and we shared that budget with each other, and we had some guiding principles, or just some let's just call them guiding principles of around decision making, if around, particularly in this case, spending. And we just, I'm dating myself now, but this is going back to anyone's doing the math. It would have been 1984. But if any of us are gonna spend more than $100, you had to at least talk to the other person first. And we would review the budget. We'd take a day at the end of the month, and we'd just have a glass of wine and and review the budget and make an evening, or just not an evening of it, that's for sure, but about 30 minutes, and just enjoy each other and say, okay, because people say, well, how long does it take to change people's behaviors? It's around 30 days of consistent behavior. And once you get that going, it's just in reoccurring, like you said, out of sight, out of mind.
That's a great point, and that actually would be a great topic for an additional episode, is how to manage finances in a marriage. There are lots of different ways to do that, and lots of different things that people don't know about that. So that's a little thing to put in our memory bank to do for a future episode. But clients then also always want to jump to investing, and that's why you don't call it investing for yourself first. It's paying yourself first, because there's an intermediate step there. That is, as you mentioned, created a savings. Right? So the emergency fund is also a really, really, really important basic principle of building a sound financial base, and one that almost every client that you run into doesn't really have. Well, usually run into it one way or the other. I actually did my very last financial plan for a friend of mine, and she and her husband had $100,000 savings emergency fund, which of course is a different conversation, right? Which is, when exactly are you going to need $100,000 in liquid money? So, but it tends to be one or the other, right? You either have people that have nothing or they have way too much. So, but we'll focus here on the people that are still building their emergency fund. And yes, investing is critically important, but here's the problem with jumping to investing or even starting investing while you're still building your emergency fund. And that is what happens if you need that emergency fund while you're building it. If you're diverting funds into an investment account, those investment funds may be illiquid. And so you want to make sure that you have that emergency fund already built. And typically, rule of thumb is 3 to 6 months of your take-home income is what you target. If you're more aggressive of an investor, you might stick with 3. If you're, more conservative, you might go with 6. And it also does depend on just your overall situation. Are you single? Are you a family? That kind of thing as well. But yes, we definitely want to get you to the point of investing, but you have to have that emergency fund first.
Yeah, very good point, because you don't want to take that penalty and then pay tax on it and the 10% penalty from coming out of that qualified money. And then studies show it's clearly over 50% never pay back what they took out as a loan, so they get further and further behind. And one real quick rule of thumb, and see my thumb, Dan, if I look at your thumb, they're different for everyone. But the rich. If I can put a plug in here, and if you haven't read it, it's a great book, The Richest Man in Babylon. And rule of thumb, and I taught this to our 3 boys, and that is, no matter what, if you stick to this, it's the 70-20-10 principle. And in arbitrary, let's just take, if you made $10,000, 70%, there's your 70, that's what you're going to live on. The next 20%, that's what you're putting away for savings. That could be savings for your next car, down payment on a home, etc. Then the last 10% is what Dan was saying. That's what that's the investing bit, and they're saving for that point in time. I call it financial independence. That's when work is optional and retirement's affordable. That's your retirement, and minimum be putting away 10% for that. And once you get good at it, ratchet it up. But I just wanted to share that. The Richest Man in Babylon, great book. It's all about being able to live with delayed gratification. In our society, that's very difficult. We're always being blitzed, from all these marketing ads, and what do they say? Each and every one of us get 10,000 messages a day, both verbally and non-verbally, about what we should be buying, etc. So, Dan, over to you. With that, I'm complete.
Excellent. No, that's a great recommendation. I'll put a link to that book out on Amazon in the description of the video below. So I just wanted to share a story as we're closing up. Actually, this whole idea of teaching people the very basics of financial planning and financial advice was something that, honestly, even after I had become a financial advisor, I didn't really run into until it happened to me on a very personal level. It was actually one of my long-term girlfriends. We had been dating for almost a year, and one day we were having dinner, and she just looked at me and said, "Can you teach me how to be good with money?" And I was kind of taken aback by the question, and I didn't really even understand the context for it, and she could kind of tell that, and she followed up by saying, "You're really good at saving money, and I don't know how to do it. Can you show me how to do it?" And it took me a while to really comprehend that she had never been shown a basic budget. She had never been shown how to set up a savings account or how to invest. And so making the assumption that even somebody who, has formal education, has a really good job, doesn't necessarily mean that in their personal life they have been given the basic tools around financial planning. This is one of my personal bugaboos, that Even sex education is taught more often in schools than financial education. And you would think that there are a lot more taboos around sex education than financial education. But always remember, it is a great basic. So in the comments below, leave a comment and let us know what are some tactics that you have for opening the conversation for somebody that you think may not have these basic tools, and tell us some stories about how you've helped your clients or friends build those basic financial planning structures. If you're interested in learning more about the services that Philip and I provide through our consulting firm, Fair Savoir Consulting, you can check us out at fsconsultingltd.com. The Valuability homepage is located on that site, but you can also get there directly by going to value-ability.com. If you have questions or topics that you would like us to cover in an upcoming episode, we'd love to hear from you. Comment in the video or contact us through our Twitter or Instagram accounts, which are both value_ability. And with that, we will wrap up this episode. Philip, as always, thank you very much for your continued leadership.
Thank you, Dan, and well done. And all of you listeners, till we talk to you next time through the airwaves, make it a great week.